at this time, we are going to introduce you to our team. So right over here, we have Jaden. You probably want to face the camera. There she is. Jaden Hastings, our research lead. We have Robert Alvarez, who's still doing tech stuff over there. There he is. He's our team advisor. You've heard we have Benny Lewis. He had a little bit of an injury, but he's watching from home, so he's with us too, also team advisor. Sita Ganju, who has been our amazing subject matter expert. And then we have Argo, Kobe, Pugal, and Andrea. So at this point, I'm going to leave this here and bring Jaden up, and we're going to listen to this amazing team share with you their research over the last 8 weeks. Thank you, JJ.
Thank you so much. Go ahead and pass it to you, Andrea, when it's your turn. How's my lab? Is my audio all right? Yeah. Fantastic. So happy to see you all. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to those that are joining us online. We're so excited to share our results with you today. So let me start off by thanking our amazing team. We've done so much in the past 8 weeks. Robert and I have just been overwhelmed by your dedication and results. So with that, we're excited to present to you finding indicators of nuclear activity from open source images using AI and ML. Our team is codenamed Eagle AI, or Eagle Eye. So since 1957, the IAEA has been responsible for monitoring nuclear activity across its 176 member states. They implement safeguards to ensure nuclear materials are used for peaceful purposes. Analysts at the IAEA are tasked with monitoring over 400 nuclear reactors currently in operation to detect and prevent any potential misuse or unauthorized activities. So let's go over the nuclear fuel cycle. The nuclear fuel cycle begins by mining to extract uranium ore. It's then milled to remove impurities and converted from uranium oxide into uranium hexafluoride. Then it's enriched from uranium oxide, or enriched from uranium hexafluoride into a more enriched form of concentrated uranium-235, which is the isotope that's needed to drive the nuclear reaction, before converting it into a solid form that can be used for energy production. The spent fuel is highly radioactive and is stored in specially designed containers for cooling and containment. Some countries choose to reprocess spent fuel. However, reprocessing also raises proliferation concerns, and not all countries pursue this step. Let's tell you a little bit about our target. Specially constructed steel containers are used to safely transport and store uranium hexafluoride. These cylinders are described primarily by the diameter and then by the design subtype. The 30B is 30 inches in diameter and primarily used to transport low-enriched uranium-235, which is less than 5% by weight. There are 48 type containers, which are 48 inches in diameter, used to transport and store natural and depleted uranium. The 48X and Y containers are similar in shape, with the Y version being the longer of the two and capable of carrying around 14 tons of nuclear material. The 48G container, the 48G container has a characteristic protruding valve at one end and is only used for storing long-term materials. There are currently an estimated 20,000 containers in active circulation, with more than 100,000 additional containers in long-term storage. So our team sought to assist experts at the IAEA by creating an AI-based solution to help detect containers from images collected from open source methods. And at which point I'd like to hand over to my colleague Andrea to tell you a bit more about our Eagle AI solution.
Eagle AI can perform as an augmented attention assistant to support the IAEA's peacekeeping mission. Through the future implementation of a dashboard like this, Eagle AI can help streamline the object detection and analysis for analysts by presenting them with a priority ranked list that will present the model's confidence on its findings. This can present the class of container that the model thinks that it detects, where the image is from, and it can help pull up past findings based on the time period and region. Again, this dashboard would be a tool to help aid nuclear safeguards analysts by highlighting where they should apply their expertise first. It still requires an analyst to make the final determination on what is in this image and what to do about it, should it be flagged or escalated. However, there has been a hurdle in developing a computer vision model like this for our nuclear safeguard specialists. To work well, current AI models require a large labeled data set with relevant observations and examples. Traditionally useful AI/ML databases do not show examples of real nuclear activity for very good reason. This means obtaining the relevant images required to train a model like this is extremely challenging. In response to this need, researchers at Sandia National Laboratory generated the Limbo dataset. This dataset has created 20 campaigns with synthetic containers. The campaigns begin very simply with single containers, and they build in complexity throughout the campaigns, including distractor objects, and then fully creating synthetic backgrounds and even including synthetic people. As you can see, they've generated nearly 1 million images to help with this computer vision research. And our team has taken a subset of this and created our Eagle Eye dataset with 200,000 randomly selected images across all campaigns to help us experiment quickly. And now I'll hand over to Pugal to discuss our baseline and also our approaches.
Thank you, Andrea. All right. So the gap between the synthetic and the real world. Well, what is this? Is what we all wonder. You see an image here, which is a computer-generated image, and you see a real photograph here, actually taken in a facility. At the top, there are computer-generated containers located in that image. And to us humans, we can look at this picture, learn what a container looks like, and when presented with this real picture, we can identify instantly, yeah, there are several containers out there. But the model fails to do so. So that's what this slide is telling. So this is a baseline classification experiment conducted by Sandia National Labs before we took over this project. They trained ResNet 50, which is a convolutional neural network, on 1,000 synthetic images, 1,000 images like this, obtained from campaign 17, one of the campaigns shown in the previous slide. So they trained using 1,000 images, they validated using synthetic images, and then they tested using synthetic images. When they did that, across the epochs, the accuracy curve was climbing. The moment you introduce real data, the accuracy drops significantly. This is one of the challenges we are trying to address. How can we teach the model what a container looks like when we do not have so many real images? It's easy to say, yeah, have more data, train the model with more data, make the data look more realistic, by making the containers look realistic. That's an obvious solution. But what we need to do is, train a different model or train a model in a different way so that it can still learn something from this and translate it to this, which is usually referred to as visual domain adaptation in the machine learning literature. Because we can do it, why can't a model do it? That was the question presented to us. And we did try to make the model do it, as you will see. So to accomplish this, we took two tasks. One is object detection, and the other one is classification. So object detection means in a given image, we try to detect a container and draw bounding boxes around that container and how many ever containers that image has. The more we detect, the better it is. And classification is a rather simple task. So it appears to be. That when presented with an image, the model is able to say, yes, it has a container, or no, it doesn't have a container. Now, one might ask, these tasks look redundant, doesn't classification come under object detection? Why are we doing both? Well, stay tuned for the answer in the coming slides. So we tried 3 different models for object detection and 4 different models for classification, but we'll only be presenting the best results from these models. All right, so our data set. So this 1 million synthetic images data set was given by Sandisk National Labs, and we call that, or they called it, Limbo data set. We created a representative subset from that Limbo data set, and we called it Eagle AI data set. We used randomly drawn images across all campaigns so that a good mixture of images were obtained from this Limbo data set. The main motivation for creating this smaller data set from the bigger one is to conduct experiments rather quickly and get solutions. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. So we were able to conduct more than 26 experiments with object detection and classification combined in the short stint of 8 weeks. And from that, we determined which experiment is worthy of using this bigger data set. Had we conducted all the 26 experiments using this big data set, we would not have completed that by now, and we would have had cost overrun from the GCP. So we tried our best to achieve the most in the given time and with minimum cost. With that, I will hand over the mic to my colleague, Kobe, who will discuss object detection.
All right, thank you, Pugal. So I think Pugal did mention that we are going to find answers, and I guess this is where the answers start. So for the object detection task, the team agreed to go with the YOLO and then the vision transformer for the object detection. So we're looking at the YOLO version of our object detection task. So we're utilizing the state-of-art YOLO V8 released by Ultralytics, and we are employing 2 of their pre-trained models in this test case. So we are using the YOLO V8N and then the YOLO V8X. In each of the pre-trained weights that we are fine-tuning for our training in process, we have 2 models on the outcome. Each model, in each case, there is the instance of the single class where we combine all the uranium hexafluoride containers into one class. So in the first class, we can see that even though we have type 48 and then we have the type 30, we have combined them into one single class as uranium hexafluoride container. And then in the second case, we have 2 classes in there. We have the 30B and then the type 48 classes being separated. So we have 4 models at the moment that we are going to compare going forward. So here we have a total about more than 400 plus real images in our Limbo data set, but we've picked 20 out of that 400 class images. So out of our 20 subset real images, we have the images IDs labeled there, and then we have the ground truth of these images. So with the green checks, they are saying those images have containers in them. And then with the red circles, they are saying these images do not have containers in them. So what we are trying to achieve is we want our 4 models to perform predictions on these images, and we want our predictions to match our ground truth. We want the model to be able to tell that this image do not have the image container in them, and these images with the red circles do not have it, and the green ones do have it. So let's take image index 74. Well, we can see that with the image index 74, the first model was not able to predict it because it sees a red circle, which tells that there is no container, but ideally the ground truth do say there is a container in that. Likewise, the second model says there is no container in that very image. But the NU model, was able to pick it up. And that is the image up here with the bounding box drawn on it with a confidence of 61. There were all other things that we did observe as to why some of the models were not able to actually pick this image up. And I think it will be discussed more in terms of some of the features that are not in our synthetic generated imagery. We can see that model that has almost all the true classes being predicted in terms of our true positive classes, all of them being predicted, right, was not also performing quite well in terms of the true negative class. But if we look at our last model, it performs quite well on our true negative class. But then there were some 2 instances that were being missed in the true positive classes as well. So now, where did we take over from in terms of our baseline experiment that was done by the Sandia National Lab? So with the baseline experiment that was done with the YOLO V5 model in terms of object detection, we have a 79% accuracy when tested on synthetic data. But then with our YOLO XU model, we do have an improvement, which gives us an accuracy of 82% on that. And with the real test case, of which we are much interested in, there is an accuracy of 45%, and then we can see the 78% accuracy improve here. And this is where we have come far with the object detection task, and I would like to invite Algo to take us through the classification task.
Yeah, thanks, Kobe, for presenting the results from object detection tasks. So I am here to present the findings from the classification task. Okay, so the main objective for this task is to develop an AI model that can actually predict that whether a container of interest, for example, 30B48 is present in an image or not. So before digging into that from the model perspective, so show you some of the statistical analysis that we have conducted on top of the Limbo data set. So one of the characteristics that we interested to investigate, like, is there any effect between object size and the performance of the model? For example, that Google mentioned that if person can identify, then why don't model? So the question is that person can identify from the object, from the image, if the container is a very good shape or good size. So it is very hard if the pixels from the images belongs to the container is relatively small compared to the whole size of the images. In this case, the Limbo data set, all the images have like 720 by 720 in size. So if, for example, if the container just only be present through 1% area compared to the whole images, so it's hard for a human to identify container within the image space. So definitely it will adversely affect the learning of the models, because the models cannot extract the relevant features in that perspective. So if we look into the distribution, we can see that the x-axis represents the area of the containers with respect to the whole image, and the y-axis represents the number of images. So from this distribution, it is clearly evident that most of the images is actually have very small area of the containers if we consider the whole images. So this is our assumption that this will have an adverse effect in the model learning. So to conduct data ablation studies, what we do, we filter out some of the training images depending on the area threshold. For example, here 1% is actually means that we remove the images that has a area size of less than 1%. And if we, and this is also true for 3%, that we will remove the images that has the area size less than 3%, and so on for 5 and 7%. And here the all means that we train the model with the all data set, regardless of the area threshold. So we can see that when we train with the 1% area threshold, the model gets model shows better performance in terms of the F1 score. And if we see that the true positive, which defines is that model correctly predicts that there is a container in the images, it also increases with the area threshold. But on the other hand, true negative decreases. True negative actually defines that model correctly predicts that there is no container. So we have, this trend is very interesting. We have explored through this experiment. So what we have decided, like, okay, 1% is the optimal area threshold to conduct the further experiments. Okay, now let's talk about the development of the AI models for this task. So though we have conducted several studies, several combinations, here we just only present the two best performing models, which is the ResNet 50 and the Vision Transformer based model in short vid. So both models have a different way to extract features from the images. For example, ResNet extract features from a series of convolutional layers, whereas the Vision Transformer is extract features through by utilizing the self-attention on the smaller image patches and then feed it into the classifier for prediction purposes. So if we look into the performance matrices, for example, in F1, the VIT model outperforms ResNet 50 model by a margin of around 12%. And if we look into the accuracy, the trend is still the same, like the accuracy is 9% higher compared to the ResNet 50 model. And this is also true for true positive rates and true negative rates. Okay, so this is a quantitative results. So there is a questions like that. There's a question whether this model is actually learning something or is just guessing something. So to investigate that perspective, we also investigate that whether this model is actually learning relevant features. For example, this is an image from the synthetic data set. You can see there is a 30 big container, if I'm not wrong. So if the model is learning relevant features, then the features comes from these portions, whereas the container belongs to the images. So if we look into the heat map from the ResNet 50, so we can see that though the model is capturing relevant features from the container, but it is still focusing on some of the irrelevant portions. For example, the buildings, the floors, and the other side, which should not be related for the predictions. But when we look into the Vision Transformer, it's actually focusing on the relevant portions of the images. So that concludes that VIT is learning more relevant features compared to the ResNet 50. And this is due to the contextual learning that the Vision Transformer provides in terms of the learning procedures. So yeah, after analyzing qualitatively and quantitatively, we can say that the Vision Transformer models is actually performing better in this task. So next, I would like to invite Robert to dig more details into the results.
All right, so as you all see, we've been talking about both object detection and classification. So you might be wondering, how is it that we're going to be using this? So we started off with that dashboard that Andrea showed. And what we're envisioning here as this being the brain behind the Eagle AI model, we're going to have an open source image basically come in. And the very first thing that it's going to see is our object detection model. If our object detection model detects that there is a container anywhere in that image, it will then show it to the analyst. That analyst will see a dashboard that looks like this, where they'll see the container or the image of interest with the bounding box around it. They'll have information about the container class, the confidence level, and ultimately that analyst will confirm whether this prediction is indeed correct. Now, because we know how important it is to reduce the number of false negatives, we have a fail-safe. If the object detection model says no, then we want to make sure that we pass it to the classification model, where it will ultimately say whether there is indeed an object present or not. If this classification model says no, we just determine that there is no container detected. But if it does say yes, then what is it that we're surfacing to that analyst? That analyst will then see a heat map with a focus of where the model is actually focusing on for that container. And here we have the image to the left, informing them where it is. We've got some really bright red spots. We have some other information that we obviously don't know what container type this is. But if you look very, very closely, it's hard to tell both on Zoom and here in person that there is indeed a container here present and it is actually detecting it correctly. Again, this analyst will confirm whether this prediction is indeed correct. And if we were to think about implementing this right away, of using all of the models that we've shown you today, from baseline to this very last ensemble, we'd actually be seeing something like this, where we're only going to be focusing here on accuracy and recall for the actual real containers. We're no longer talking about synthetic environments. So if we were to implement this with the very first baseline model that we saw when we started, we would have an accuracy of about 45% among containers and a recall of 41%. That means that roughly 60% of real nuclear material containing containers are never shown to analysts. Means that that model never detects it. When we look at only the object detection model, that YOLO V8X that Kobe was mentioning, we increase that accuracy to 78% and that recall to 68%. So we're already making big improvements there. Now, if we then look at it only as a classification task, we have this VIP model with this 86% accuracy and 83% recall. So again, making very big improvements. But ultimately, that ensemble approach, by having that fail-safe, we're actually getting much, much better. Our accuracy does drop a little bit, but I'm actually very happy to say that our recall is much, much higher. So here you could think of it as the whole being greater than the sum of the individual parts. So this ensemble method actually does work. And we would only have a 7% false negative rate versus a 60% from the beginning. We are doing much, much better. But this doesn't end here. That would be the very first iteration of this model. We can think of this as a human-in-the-loop machine learning model, where our analyst will get images being sourced through the model. That analyst will confirm whether that container is indeed present, maybe present a little bit more information about what type of container it is. And that would actually get fed back into the model. So we would then have a blend of real images with synthetic images being trained and going iteratively progressing and making improvements to that model, ultimately increasing the confidence and the reliability and reducing those false negatives. So how is it that this helps not just the IAEA analysts at the office, but also one in the field? So we know that the IAEA analysts have to actually go to these nuclear facilities. They will be taking pictures, sometimes be taking cameras as well. And we want to make sure that this Eagle AI model is something that they can leverage as well. So on the left-hand side here, since we know that videos are just a series of images, we can just splice that video and show them and pass it through the model. So on the left-hand side, this is a video of synthetic containers of one of those campaigns. And this is simulating a walkthrough of an analyst walking through the nuclear facility and identifying all of these containers. But on the right-hand side, this is a real video downloaded from the IAEA Facebook page, which actually has real containers. We're no longer talking about synthetic here, and it is also able to identify those as well. So this can not just help with open source images, could also help with open source videos, but ultimately also help the analyst out in the field as well. So what are sort of the takeaways from our lessons from our sim to real here? Now, for anyone wanting to work in synthetic to real environments, one of the important things that we noticed in our information was actually context. That means that not just the container had to be accurate, but also the scenarios in which the container was typically found in had to be accurate. This is a real image of a real container that no model ever predicted correctly. We were able to capture the container in the far left there, meaning the one that's all by itself, perfectly fine. But no model of any experiment we ran was ever able to detect the container that that technician is laying on. So that means that we need to generate additional images of humans touching these containers, because that was actually very confusing to our model. Additionally, size matters. This is something that Arga was discussing, in which if the size of the container is too small relative to the size of the image, it would actually be very hard for the model to focus on specifically, and would actually confuse the model when it saw things that were just small but very fine grained. And we can talk about that more during the Q&A. But that is the container right there. It is very, very small and actually hard to see. So that's why we would say that this is not a good training image, but it could be good for a good test image. And as I mentioned, Ensemble's approach could actually be very useful for these sorts of situations where you have a metric that you want to be focused on, whether false positives or false negatives, where here then the whole would be greater than the sum of the individual parts. And again, we're very proud to say that for those thinking that synthetic to real parity is not achievable, we have hopefully shown that it is actually possible. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And that was amazing. Very, very proud of this team and what they have accomplished in a short 8-week sprint. At this time, we're going to do some questions and answers. If you're joining us in Zoom, we do have a moderator who will be watching for your raised hand and we'll call on you. So at this time, do you want to moderate your questions and answers out here? I think
Sure.
you guys know the best, which would one of your team members.
Happy to.
All right, we do have a microphone available right over there. So anyone in the audience that has, and there goes the Brad Newberg. There he is, he's in there. All right, Robert, I'll hand this back to you.
Oh, I've got my microphone, so.
Okay, great.
Testing.
Yes.
Oh, I just wanted to say I was at one of your very early review sessions, and I'm just kind of blown away at how much progress you've made, how well you described the problem, how you approached it, and the results you got. So it's just really stellar. So don't have a question, just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Yeah, Brad saw the presentation when we were still struggling to get the data. We had about 20 terabytes, and I think at the time we had maybe 100 gigabytes. So. Yeah.
Hi, I actually do have a question, but again, that was a very good talk. It was very well presented and gave a very good understanding of what your challenge is and what you're trying to do. I have a question about the synthetic data set. So first of all, my understanding is that this isn't trying to find these nuclear storage containers in unknown locations that they're not expected. This is people going out to a site and trying to count the number and they expect to see some. And I suppose that's different than trying to find some like hiding in a forest or something like that. So the type of synthetic images are industrial sites with industrial equipment, and then you have these cylinders there. One question is, are the images fully synthetic, or are you taking real images and you're superimposing the cylinders on? Because that makes a big difference. And then another thing, are you trying to find like ones that are hidden somewhere or ones that are people trying to disguise? Or is this more a matter of you're going to a site and you're simply trying to count the number without somebody purposely trying to hide them? Oh, and one final point, the tech that was leaning on it is, I noticed that there was some writing and markings on the cylinder. Could it actually be the imperfections on the cylinder that is hiding it, not necessarily that there's a man that's leaning on it? So anyway, I'll stop with those.
Yeah, so I'll address the very, very first one, which was, are we trying to help the analyst out in the field, but we're also trying to reduce some of these things that we might find in the wild due to bad actors. So both of them are important, but we've sort of kept the storyline to the IAEA analyst. I'll have Andrea answer the question regarding whether the entire image is synthetic or just the container.
To start with that one, for the Limbo data set, they start with real backgrounds and completely synthetic containers. And then as the campaigns go on, they switch to only real skies and everything else in the image is synthetic.
And why?
That was the way that the data was generated, but there's a third question that you had, which I'll have Pugal answer, which is regarding whether the person leaning on it, whether the text and the imperfections were an issue.
Yes, we did conduct some experiments on the presence of text in the image and how it impacts our object detection or classification. So that's where the area threshold filtering comes into picture. Because the text appears very tiny on the container or above, it's hardly 1% of the total images area. So when we removed all the images that had less than 1% of container area present in them, the model was clearly able to distinguish what is a container and what is a letter that looks like a container. For example, C, O, N, these letters, they have features of the container. And when a container is so small, the model cannot differentiate between C, the letter C, and a portion of the container. So we did run some experiments on how we can clarify to the model, hey, this is a letter. and this is a container. And that's where the area threshold comes into the picture. But with people, we were not able to do that because we don't have enough variations of people, people of different color, people of different sizes, people in different postures. These were not available to us in the synthetic data set. So that's why the model is having trouble whenever a person is in the field of view, or even worse, leaning on the container or opening a valve. So these are all still some challenging parts. And that's where the slide lessons learned from sim to real saying the context. Can you go back to that image? Yeah, so this is a really testing image for us because these two gentlemen have troubled us quite a lot in our journey. So this container was detected fairly well. We were able to detect this one, but there are 4. And these two, we really have a hard time detecting it. So there is something about people near the containers that the model is not able to learn properly. And we feel that it's because the data set does not present the model with enough instances of people around them. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. So the moral of the story is if you're trying to hide nuclear material containers, you just put a little cutout person and you put it right next to it and it'll completely hide it.
And really quick, I'd like to add, just as a reminder, we used the Limbo data set and we're very thankful for it as a resource to overcome that crippling lack of real images to fill out a data set for AI training. But we did not generate it. And as a result, why specifically is the sky still real? Maybe the synthetic sky looked very strange or was doing something else with the model. But again.
Yeah, and then the business package was what they had for people. So those people on cell phones and briefcases next to containers. So they're synthetic images. Matthew?
All right. Yeah, so first of all, I also want to congratulate, I think actually this is amazing results. I love FDL because like in 8 weeks, you guys change a field. So congratulations on that. My question is a very Google one. And it's actually really about how ambitious you guys are. And the technical kind of thing actually I would like to know is how fast does those algorithms, how computational demanding? And the reason actually I'm interested in this is that I believe actually I'm sure actually and I'll let actually our DOE friends actually comment on this, but there are public security aspect of this work. We at Google actually already collaborate with a lot of agencies to run things, for example, detector for child pornography or explosives across basically all the internet images. And I think actually this could be like a great candidate for collaborations we do there. But of course, an aspect here is how computationally demanding is. I understand YOLO is particularly geared towards being very fast and nimble. Vision transformers are not. So the question is, have you measured that? And also how willing you are to scale this to massive internet scales, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Toby, Argo?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll start and then maybe I'll go add something. So in terms of the YOLO, like you mentioned, it's more fast compared to the vision transformer. And I know with a vision transformer, we would have to create a VM, break it down because that is not working, start a new VM with a higher GPU to start, takes days in running the model. And it was good because we were only trying to fine tune on the model rather than probably training from scratch in some case. But then as long as the instances were available to run the model or the right GPU is available, like you did give in the prompt, yes, computationally is expensive on the vision transformer because it's trying to extract the features individually in the image to train the model. And obviously it helps us with the good performances and in the metrics that we see currently. Yeah, so computationally it's expensive on the vision transformer side compared to the YOLO side because we were able to train on the whole Limbo data set on the YOLO, which is on the 1 million data set. And with object detection, we are going into billions because we are dealing with the instances in each image because in one image, we can have about 10 objects in there and the instance count throughout that 1 million images becomes more. but then it was still relatively fast in 2 days in computation for that. But the vision transformer, I remember even for the object detection, was taking so long on a VM that we were using. And at some point, the model done training and it tells me we can't find the path to put the yeah, so there were all those ups and downs in the process, but then in terms of the cost, yeah, it is.
So my suggestion would be, if you guys, before you shut it off, maybe do a measurement of the amount of flops to go through the pipeline. Understand you run only the vision transformer if YOLO actually didn't fire. And so like in a kind of getting action ensemble understanding of that, that would help actually kind of scoping. If we were to run this really at scale, what it would take. We'll care about the virtual machining case, but we need to understand actually how big it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Sure. And
yeah.
This is a rather naive question, but I'm kind of a naive person. But you're not actually doing any analysis of the image. You're not, doing edge detection or saying that this makes an oval or anything like that. This is just a matter of seeing something that something like what you've seen before in the training set.
okay, so something that we've seen before, yes, but the ultimate goal is we want to train on the synthetic data. And the synthetic data we are training on is not something that the real world case have seen. We've seen almost something that looks like it, because in terms of the synthetic generation, we want to mimic the real world instance, but we train our model on only the synthetic data set. And then based on the features that look similar in the synthetic data, we want to perform that prediction on the real set.
Okay, but fundamentally, there's no difference between the synthetic data and real data in terms of the process here. I just sort of wondered, has anybody applied this to, say, classifying galaxies?
No.
Do you know?
Yeah.
It would be something that we could look into. So.
Yeah, I want to add on that point. As also Messi, bring this topic, like, can we scale up these experiments? So that's the one of, we want to make this model generalizable in terms of anyone who wants to train the model with synthetic data, because in some rare cases like galaxies or any national security related data that are not very publicly available. So we need to rely on the synthetic data. So that's the point scheme, like that should be a scale up in terms of the generalizability in the application. Yeah, we are definitely aiming that, yeah.
Great, thank you. So a couple of questions, and again, a great job and a very clear and well-articulated presentation. The question I have is, with the results you got on accuracy and recall, do they yet achieve a level where the Department of Energy would actually be able to consider using the tool now? And if not, what is that threshold for the actual utilization of this technique that has been developed? How far off might we be from, actual practical use? And maybe that's a question for someone at DOE. But
I think this was, we're probably at a point where we would have a proof of concept and would be something that we try out. There's a lot of data that was never shared with us because of classified concerns. But if the Department of Energy were to implement it and try it on their classified data and have this human in the loop machine learning model, there's a lot more that can be learned and improved upon. So that would be kind of a proof of concept. 100% could be ready to use now.
And then the second question, and this is maybe also a hybrid question for both the team and DOE, might it be valuable to give DOE some guidelines on or guidance on additional training set images? Like, let's get more images with, people in the image or sprawled on top of or nearby the containers, and see if that can help further develop the tool. And maybe, for example, then we take and continue this work next year with a different or larger or more specifically challenging data set.
Well, I'll let them answer the question about the data set, but we also do have some members from the Sanya team who are on Zoom that might be able to. Yeah. If you unmute yourselves, Tim and Zoe, we can hear you.
Hi guys, great job today. I think this is a really interesting point that you bring up, Bill, because I think what Where the Sandia portion of the team really wants to go with this is to say, you know, we have 1 million images in this data set, and we want computer vision not to care if there's a person doing a funny pose that we've never seen before. Like, with so much training data and so much variance in that data, you know, why is computer vision not able to detect these things that humans so easily can? So that's where our kind of future research directions are going from this. But I think thinking about what those critical features are and how we integrate them into looking for objects that maybe we've not seen before in the real world data, and you know, what might we anticipate seeing, and how to integrate that into future data sets could be something interesting to think about in the future, for sure. So thank you for that.
I think so.
Hey guys, this is Tim. So great work. Definitely gonna want to dig in with you guys later on some of your results there. It looked to me like you had test real performance that was pretty darn close to the test synthetic performance, and so that's looking really good to me. We're going to want to hear a lot more detail on those numbers, but yeah, very happy with what we're looking at.
Thanks, Tim. I think presentation is very accessible to a layperson. I was able to understand it, and I'm grateful for you all for that. My question is, if you had more time, what would you focus on next?
Okay.
One of the things I think we would focus on is that YOLO-VIT model. We really were looking forward to the results from that. We thought it was very promising based on how the classification VIT model was performing. But as Kobe unfortunately mentioned, at the end, after a very long training session, it said it could not find the path to save. So we definitely like to rerun that model.
After 4 days of compute, it was running on the cloud for 4 days. Yeah.
So the second thing that we would like to focus on is also a security issue, which is images with noises, injected noises, purposefully injected noises intended to confuse the models. In technical terms, it's also called as adversarial images, and there are several types of them. A popular example being Carlini-Wagner attack. We did create a lot of such adversarial images with varying noises injected into the images, which a human won't be affected, but a machine learning algorithm will be adversely affected. And we want our ML model to be immune to such attacks, so that, you know, in future, a bad actor who wants to fool our model using such attacks won't succeed. So.
Hello, thank you. I want to, first of all, just say that I appreciate your attention to the user experience and the overall application, and the way you had in mind making a simple and accessible way to leverage the results of your machine learning model. And I also thought it was clever how you tied together these different elements of the ensemble models, the synthetic data, the clever use of the smaller data set for you to be able to iterate faster, and then of course the human in the loop at the end. So great job tying all of that together, and then also getting a great result at the end. I have a few questions. The first one is about what were the other hard examples that you didn't show in the 7% of missed images? Were they all involving humans? Was there another category you could name?
Okay, so there were others other than the humans. There were some instances where if there are more tests on the image, the model finds it difficult detecting the containers in there. And I think Pugao did make the point where because the curves in those texts tend to look like the containers. So it tends to focus the bounding box on the text rather than the container. But we did have a fix for that where we try to filter out the area threshold. So if there is anything less than a 0.005 or figure, we want to take those areas out. So we did same for classification, same for object detection. And as Algo did present in there for the vision transformer, we saw that when the area threshold was below 1% were taken out, there was improvement in the F1 metrics. And same in the object detection, we did fix the issue where the bounding box or the model were focusing on the text, and now we're focusing on the containers themselves.
Great, thanks. I think that's explaining a case of false positives. I'm curious if there were false negatives.
So, yep, there were the false negatives where that's where we were trying to use the ensemble to actually fix this issue. So we tried to get the class being balanced, because in classification, it's a binary classification we're doing here, container, no container. But in the object detection, we're trying to have, we could have in the U models that we did present, where we have the UF6 30 or 48 being classified, but we assembled them where if you see at least one, just pass the two, where we increase our recall in this sense, but then the accuracy, as Robert did show, was being affected there.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. I'll add a little bit to your question. So one of the things that we did see is that we had containers that were shielded in a specific type of protective case that was never part of our synthetic data. So these are actual casings for these types of containers that our model would sometimes get right, sometimes get wrong. But it was impressive that they would get it right, given that there was literally 0 instances of them in the entire data set. So those were the ones that we struggled with the most.
Thank you. Yeah, that's fascinating. And also, I think I could imagine extensions of adding additional classifiers and more ensembling that might help with some of that. I was also curious about the classifier. If you had a probabilistic classifier, if you could maybe take examples where it was like, oh, I'm 40% sure it's here. And instead of throwing that away, maybe prefer higher recall.
Yeah, for the confidence, anything over 30% was shown to an analyst.
Got it. Awesome. And then maybe one more question. I'm curious if you've explored multimodal models and a way to do concept learning. CLIP is a famous one that does vision and text, and it kind of finds a shared representation of these vision text pairs. And I'm curious to know if you've explored things beyond vision transformers for classification and object detection, just in terms of conceptual representation learning, and what you think of that area, and if it could be applicable to what you're working on.
Yeah, Argo?
Yeah, but in this study, we are very limited to the unimodal task. I know the CLIP model and GLIP model, they have the very rich representation of they are trained on a large data sets, but along with that, they also need a text. But for this task, we have not considered that two directions, because we don't have those, due to the limited time, generating those texts for each of the images and captions is a time-consuming task. But yeah, definitely we will take that part in futures, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, and then I guess leveraging generative AI for additional synthesis would be really interesting, as you kind of alluded to. Thank you.
So it's hard to follow up. My question seems really dumb now, but it kind of goes along with what you were saying. So if you had a wish list of tools that you didn't have access to this time, what are your top 3 tools you'd like to use in the next iteration of this project?
What are the top 3 tools you would like to use for the next iteration of this project?
If I can chime in for synthetic data in general, computer generative artists, people that have expertise in generating quite a large set of really hyper-realistic and nuanced environments.
Yeah, I think what JJ's alluding to is, I think some of the people on the Sandia team showed these synthetic images to artists and to lay people, and the artists were like, that's fake. They're like, how do you know? They're like, because of the shadows and the way the light falls. And they're like, oh, okay. So that sort of additional help would be useful. There might be some questions in the Zoom chat as well too. Yeah.
Okay, there's a question online as well from Jose. Is it possible to detect people in images first and remove to feed the model to test it. Remove only the person from the image probably will add much more complexity.
Yeah, so Jose, thank you for that question. Kobe, that's all you.
Okay, so yes, Jose. Our model, actually, we had 5 classes defined for our object detection. So we have the UF6 container classes separate. We have human, and then we have other noise detections aside the UF6 containers that were in focus. So we had that in mind. And then because we wanted to filter out those noises out, so we made sure the model were not focusing on the humans themselves. And to add, even the yellow models were also trained on more of those human instances. So aside the synthetic human imageries that we had from the Limbo data set, it had those land features of the human. So it helped us filter out that as well. Yeah.
I would like to just add to that. So the whole object detection depends on the labels that we supply to the model. And the label comes from a JSON file. And the JSON file records whatever is there in the image that we instructed the computer to do. All right. So if there are 20 persons in that image, and if we had set a threshold of just record up to 10 persons, it will only give you the bounding box for 10 persons. So identifying people and removing them from that image, first of all, it may require photoshopping expertise to just vanish the person, or we can tell the model to ignore such labels from the bounding boxes. But all these things require substantially more work, detailed work, to teach the model to only look at this and ignore this. Like, that's a bit more challenging, a bit more time consuming, but it can be done with some more resources.
So I just wanted to give an idea about how to add people to your synthetic imagery. It can be very hard to add 3D drawn people through traditional procedural 3D graphics. So one idea is you take your existing simulated no people images and you lean on something called Midjourney, which is a generative art system, which is very good at drawing people. And one aspect of Midjourney is you can give it an infill image and you can give a mask. So you give your, industrial setting with the containers, you give a mask where you'd like it to infill a person, let's say like an oval near it. And then Midjourney would infill, and it's very good with your text prompt to have a lot of diversity in terms of different kinds of people and styles. And so that could way to bootstrap quite quickly, quite realistic people. You'd have to play with the text prompt, but that's a whole emerging sort of set of tricks. But you might be able to merge very quickly, because I could see it being very hard to procedurally draw people and not have like, not working well, frankly.
Yeah.
So that could be an interesting trick.
Yeah,
so.
Fascinating. Any questions also in the chat? Any other questions in the chat? Yeah.
Oh, I have one question. First of all, again, thank you. It was already said, but you made the presentation very clear and even made me think I understood it. So that was great. My question was, for your procedure you have with the person in the loop that can then add images back to the training set, seems like it will reinforce detections, but the person won't see things that were missed by both models, right? So will that skew your results in some way how do you deal with improving the fact that the models missed containers, that people don't see that?
Yeah, so that's always going to be a challenge. The false negative will continue to be a challenge, but the analysts will actually see both true positives and false positives. So they'll actually be labeling things that are not containers, so that it actually gets to discriminate better between non-container and an actual container. The false negative issue is a very, very hard one. We're trying to get as much recall as possible while also limiting the amount of images we show to an analyst. So there is going to be a balance there. So we think that with 93% and hopefully better as we would iterate on this model, that would be a great starting point to show enough false positives and enough true positives to make the model better. And then we could also surface recently processed images, meaning that we would have this database of things that the analyst has seen and things that were never shown to them, and we can reprocess those to see if there's additional things that the new version of the model would now catch.
Brad, did you have one more? Yeah, we want to wrap it up, but why don't you go ahead and wrap it up for us?
I'll do it quickly. I'm really interested in your extension of open source intelligence of sort of on social media or AP Newswire, accidentally, you know, capturing images of containers and antagonistic context, perhaps. I'm interested about hearing your ideas about that extension. And then also you could use techniques like style transfer to sort of mimic sort of traditional grainy footage from an AP video to sort of start augmenting your data set again to work in that open source intelligence way.
So if I can chime in, there are established open source image databases that are already being collected. GCP already is involved heavily in this. So absolutely, that was one of the original intents, was to, through a sort of accidental encountering, just through filtering of normal publicly available images. That's to work in the open web rather than what is underneath the surface. Or just, I won't comment on where you can find some of these things, but there are instances available on the web where you will see a container, perhaps not exactly where you would want it to be.
If he tells you more, Brad, you'll have to disappear. Well, first of all, let's have a big round of applause for the team. For their advisors, for subject matter experts, for DOE and the training data set, and you know, our sponsors and partners. Once again, couldn't have been done without you. And I can only echo again what everybody said. What a wonderful job you did, not just in terms of the work, but also in presenting it in an accessible way to this broad audience. So thank you very much.